like, wow, that's crazy, right? It doesn't get me mad. Like, it just doesn't get me mad. I don't know if that's something you develop in journalism or something I have. It just doesn't get me mad. Like, it doesn't affect me. It's not, they don't know me. They're just being assholes. And so I'm sitting there and I'm listening to John Rocker. I'm not mad. Like, I understand he's a moron, like, and he's not punching me in the face. He's just being a moron. So I guess a lot of people, there's a lot of like somebody in normal circumstance, you're a Jewish guy from New York sitting next to a racist, and the racist starts spewing all this stuff. In a normal circumstance, in a normal setting, I would have said, hey, asshole, my blah, 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 nephews are biracial, or hey, asshole, my best friend is gay, or hey, whatever, like anything like that. But in that journalistic world, or in that world as a reporter, it doesn't even pop into my head. You just roll with it. It's just what you do.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, you got.
You're a better man than I.
I was gonna say.
It's a job. Honest to God,
Sure.
it's a job. It's not like I never get mad. I get more mad. I'll tell you what gets me mad. I swear to God. Like today, I was in a coffee shop working, and someone comes in, and they're watching a movie on their phone out loud. Like that pisses me off. When people leave shopping carts in a parking space in the parking lot, that pisses me off. I get tired of I don't like rude behavior, and I don't like people belittling other people. But if some guy's being a racist, he's just an asshole. So he's just a bad person. He's just as vile, and something's broken in him. And I can step back from that.
Yeah, don't waste your time with it, right? That's the main thing. So Jeff, I think it was in Showtime. You wrote that Jack McKinney's dad, Paul, snuck him into the great Bambino's funeral, and Jack was very emotional at age 9, obviously, just being a part of that. And I guess if and when you spoke with Jack about it, does he reflect on what he was actually sneaking into at that age, as like he was witnessing the funeral of one, if not the best baseball player of all time?
First of all, that's a deep cut right there. Like that's like if you had like Kendrick Lamar on your podcast and you were asking him about the 12th song on an album that he did 27 years ago, that would be that question, which is kind of impressive and speaks well for you. Jack McKinney died like 10 years ago. I just want to say he was awesome. I literally in my office have a letter he wrote me about the book. That's a beautiful and thankful letter hanging in my office. Awesome. I loved him. He was awesome. He was great. I was glad that the show Winning Time gave him some props. I do not remember how aware he was. I know his dad said to him, made him aware that you're at this funeral of the great Bambino and blah, blah, blah. I can't tell you that at the time, at age whatever, he was like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing ever. What I know he knew, or I knew he felt, is he was somewhere cool with his dad. Yes. And like that was the meaning to him, I think, more actually than being at this funeral when he was a kid, is that his dad took him somewhere and it was meaningful. Which I think if you think about your own childhood, I certainly think of mine, it's kind of the same thing. You value the time with people more than the events you go to.
Oh, absolutely. And like, I'll give you an example. Like I go to a Red Sox game with my dad and my brother every single year, and we try a different city, right? So like, that's like an event I'll remember my entire life because it's an annual tradition, A, but also B, like, what happens in the game is very memorable. Things can happen, right? So that's why I always like those trips, just because something happens. But like that in itself, that's a huge moment. Like to see like, Babe Ruth's funeral is absolutely insane. And the fact that he snuck him in was even better. But
wait, I want
Jeff,
to say one thing. I just want to wait. Yes. I want to make one point. So my dad, who was a great, great guy, died in December. And he was my role model and my hero. And he taught me so much about writing. And when I think back at his life, he was 82 and he had pancreatic cancer. And when I think about his life and I think about my time with him, I don't think about like that time we went on vacation to so-and-so. I really don't. And I don't think about like movies we went to, blah, blah, blah. I actually think about drives I took with him and like conversations I had with him and moments I had with him. And I think like for all of us at the end of the day, we all work really hard to create memories, quote unquote, like for our kids, we'll take them to Disney and, oh, this is going to be, but really the things you're like, my son is about to go off to college and I'm crushed. Right. And when I think about my son, what I think first and foremost of is about 10 years ago when we had a cherry pit spitting contest into a bowl, and just the two of us sitting there spitting pits into a bowl. I just think those little moments in life, I know this isn't what this podcast is about, really matter, you know?
No, I mean it hits home. I mean it's a discussion worth having, right? So no, and I definitely appreciate you sharing that, and sorry to hear about your father as well. But I Jeff, flipping over to the Magic Johnson side of things, right? In his introductory press conference, right, with the Lakers and obviously the national media when he got initially drafted, he mentions how he was going to play for the Lakers for 3 years, and then he was going to finish his career with the Detroit Pistons.
Yep.
So obviously ownership was quite worried. Jeannie and Jerry were like, "What the hell's going on?" But then it seemed like Jerry had more confidence. But do you think the winning aspect of winning multiple championships, and then obviously the Pistons drafting Isaiah Thomas at the time, kind of ruined their chances of landing Magic Johnson?
No, I think LA is a better place to be than Detroit, Michigan. And being on the Lakers was better than being on the Pistons. And he established a life out here. I live out here. And he loved it. You know, his initial reaction was when he first met Jeannie was, I'm going to be here a little bit, but then I'm going to go back to Detroit. But I mean, I moved here from New York. I got to say, it's the sweetest place to live in many ways. There's a moment in the book that did make it in a TV show, and I always was confused by this. His first time visiting California, he tells the car to stop, and he gets out because he sees fruit growing on the trees, and he wants to pick an orange from the tree, and he's just dumbfounded that he lives in this place where fruit grows on trees. I just think that was the thing that ultimately won him over, was
Yeah.
fruit on trees and LA, and it doesn't snow here,
No longer Michigan.
Yeah, exactly.
No longer Michigan, and sun 9-10 months out of the year, and then it's like when it gets cold, it's like, oh, it's cold today, it's 50, and then back in Michigan, it's got a foot of snow on the ground and windy, and yeah, I can see that for sure. So to kind of piggyback off that, so what was your process like? And obviously you write the book, you write Showtime, and then what was that process like getting it made into a television show? Because this is a project that you that you go years in the making, and now all of a sudden it's going to be made into this episodic television series. What's that process like, and what was your involvement in the process? And then when they took stuff out, or if they had to add stuff in, like what was that process like? And then ultimately the final product, like what was your opinion of the final product itself after going through writing the book, going through the creation of the script, all of that editing process, and then the final show itself?
Well, I mean, I never thought it would happen. Like even when there's a guy named Jim Hecht, really good guy, screenwriter, came to my house, blah, blah, blah. Want to option the book. Can be great. I have this idea. I'm like, all right, okay, that's great. All right. But it's never going to happen. And it took 8 years. I mean, it took 8 years, which is a long time. And I never thought it would happen. Never thought it would happen. Never thought it would happen. One day, there's an article in like the Hollywood Reporter, and it's like John C. Reilly cast in show based on Laker book. And I'm like, whoa, what? And then there's another article, Sally Field cast in show, Jason Segel, Adrian Brody. And all of a sudden I'm like, whoa. And then they start filming and I'm like, whoa. And it was crazy. First of all, it put my kids through college, like financially, it's great. It's like money for nothing.
Absolutely.
Second of all, they were great about having me involved, like great. I wasn't there all the time. I wasn't even there half of all the time, but they had tons of questions, invited me to set, let me, my wife, my kids be in the pilot episode. And then I played a reporter in a season 2 episode. Like, it was just fun. Like, it was so fun. It was so magical. And like, we really became close with a lot of the cast, guys like Quincy, who played Magic, and Delonte played Coop. And, this is great. It was great. It was so great and so fun. It felt like going to summer camp. It really did. I was sad when it ended, right? It sucks. But
yeah,
it is I always say nobody wants to hear you complain about only having 2 seasons of an HBO show. I'd be the biggest dick of all time. People would be like, man, I'm sorry. And I'm like, you do not have to be sorry. This was the greatest experience of my life. So
that's great.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. And just a quick follow up. So this was one thing when in doing research on kind of your pieces, and it. So when you said that your process, you like kind of go back to nostalgic times, and that's kind of the motivation for writing a lot of the books and pieces that you do. I just noticed that a lot of your subject matter, as far as the people that you write about, with Barry Bonds or Roger Clemens or Brett Favre. By the way, the best line in doing all of this research when like all that stuff came out about Favre, and you're like, "Don't buy my book," and it was just like it was awesome. And then like Jamel Hill came over the top. I'm like, "You're never gonna see an author do this ever. This is awesome." But for a lot of the figures that you're right about, there's some of the most talented people in their sports history, but there's also this kind of, I don't want to call it a dark side, but there's these other character flaws that they show throughout their career. So when you get into that and you're trying to put a kind of a whole representation of them, just like how do you kind of go through that process, kind of similar to what you did with Rocker, but like all of those figures that are very polarizing figures in each of their sports, like what's your process of trying to capture all of them, also kind of their greatness, their story, but also let people know kind of some of the other things that they've done?
I think the guiding principle, and in a way, one of the things about journalism is how to explain it. All right, there was a writer named Russell Baker years ago in the New York Times, and he wrote a book called Growing Up, and he wrote about writing. And he said something along the lines of, it's really important to have, every now and then, to have the villain of your story bend over and smell a rose, right? Like, these people are humans. And like Barry Bonds is a great example. I covered Barry Bonds. He was the biggest dick I've ever covered in my life. He was am I allowed to curse?
Yeah, of course.
He was the worst. Yeah, he was the worst. He was truly the worst. He's the worst person I've ever covered. He was impossible to cover. He was mean. He was deliberately mean. He was just awful. And in a way, one of the flaws of that book, I wish I could have a do-over on that one. It's fine, but it's not great. Is like, to me, the question is like, it isn't like, how big of an asshole is Barry Bonds? The question is, how did Barry Bonds wind up being this? Like, what do you have to go through in your life to become this big of a dick? And that's what makes people really fascinating. Even Brett Favre, like, Brett Favre was not a dick, I didn't think. I mean, he's done some really horrible things. But like, what is it to grow up with this overbearing football dad in the Deep South? Roger Clemens, you know, not the best guy in the world, but like his hero was his older brother, Randy, who became a drug addict and like basically, and you know, long story, but like his wife was killed by drug dealer. Like there are all these backstories that people have, you know?
Yeah. And
to me, one of the great joys of writing and one of the honors of writing is you get to really dig into them. So nobody's all good. Nobody's all bad. The absolutism of social media these days is garbage. Even Trump, I cannot stand Trump. I hate him more than any person I know in the world. I'm sure he's pet a dog before. You know, I'm sure he's had an ice cream cone before. Like, I'm sure. And like, if I were doing a biography of Donald Trump, I'd want to find those moments. I'd be desperate to find those moments. And the weird thing about the Bonds, I actually just saw this. The Bonds thing was, I tried really hard to find people who liked him, and it was almost impossible. Like, I really wanted to find people who were like, oh, Barry's awesome. Very hard to do. He was a dick. He was just a dick.
Yeah.
I was going to say, like, was one of your calls to, just sarcastically, was one of your calls to see if somebody liked him, Jeff Kent? Because, like, their relationship was always fascinating to me, even as, like, a young baseball fan. Like, they would just throw barbs each other at the media, and, like, it was... I imagine that clubhouse was not very fun to be in, and just like, but you had two MVP level guys on the same baseball team at the same time. And it was like, they couldn't get along. They hated each other, but they were on the same team and they're all striving towards like the same goal. It was wild to me.
Well, I did a lot of Giants back then when I was because I was at Sports Illustrated and I was working on that Bonds book. The thing about baseball that doesn't get said enough, like the truth of the matter, if we're going to be totally honest, it doesn't really matter if Kent and Bonds like each other. First of all, they were unpopular in the clubhouse together. Like they weren't like, neither of them was particularly liked in the clubhouse. So in a way that worked to the team's advantage. And that team actually was awesome to cover because even though Bonds was a nightmare and Kent was not great, Jason Schmidt was awesome and Ellis Burks was awesome. And like, Sean Dunstan was awesome, and Rob Nen was really good. So they had like a lot of really great guys. Their two superstars were not, but that's okay.